primary agenda item for tonight's meeting is that to begin the discussion about developing a community-wide survey to discern attitudes and experiences and perceptions of police-community relations here in Peekskill. This was a huge topic of conversation repeatedly throughout the whole time that the Police Reform Task Force was doing its work. Everyone very much wanted to do it. We just did not have the time to do it properly and in depth before we had to write the task force report and submit it to Albany. So the recommendation was that we begin to develop that as soon as reasonably possible after the submission of the report to Albany. And certainly when our public meetings happened monthly of the task force, people who attended, citizens who attended the meeting and spoke to us as task force members were very, very keen on getting a high quality in-depth survey going as quickly as possible. So I did email back and forth with Andy Stewart a bit this week about this, and he definitely encourages the HRC to begin to take that on. I can do some screen sharing if that's helpful. I have copies of the City of Poughkeepsie's police community relations survey that they did in 2018. And I also have some suggestions from Jay Forbes, who's a Peekskill resident and who was on he wasn't an official member of the Police Reform Task Force, but he was an official member of one of the working group committees. And he had suggested some categories for questionnaires regarding perceptions of policing in Peekskill. So I can screen share both of those. We can take a look at those. And then I'd love to open it up for conversation and hear your perceptions and your ideas about how we might frame this survey. Andy tells me that the communications consultancy that is now working with the city can help us with getting a complete or a designed survey out to the various constituents in Peekskill. And as you'll see from Jay Forbes' comments in a little bit, he's suggesting that we, of course, work with other community organizations like the Hispanic Coalition, the NAACP, seniors, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the email. But just cast as wide a net as possible to capture data and information about our fellow citizens' experiences of working with the police in Peekskill. Does that sound good? Joe, yes.
Susie, I lived in a world called process. And so I'm trying to think to myself, is the survey our primary process, or is there some form of process that we can be involved with the police rather than just being an oversight monitor? Can they be involved in this process somewhat? Could we perhaps form a subcommittee so that we work on a continuous basis rather than just once a month? I have these questions about, what are the suggested, were there any from the commission, any suggested guidelines that we should be using to monitor?
I want to make certain that I understand what you're saying. Are you talking about the monitoring process that we've been assigned by City Council?
Yes.
Okay, so that's different than the survey topic. So I just want to make sure that I'm understanding that you'd like to bring that up as a topic as well.
I
Is that correct?
I didn't realize the survey was different than what I just said. It has a different essence.
It's a different task, and it's one of the recommendations that was in part of it, that is part of the task reform report.
It is a recommendation. Okay.
It is a recommendation. And so, whereas one of the things that we have been asked to do by City Council is to hear updates from the city manager and the police chief about
Okay.
plans for implementing those recommendations. So that's an official thing that we have been asked to do.
Okay.
We're also being encouraged to, as the HRC, to begin to develop a survey and work with other community organizations to develop this survey as a way, excuse me, as a way of beginning the implementation of one of those recommendations. So it's like, it's two different and yet closely knit together tasks. Does that help?
Yeah, I could see that the survey is a task that could help us implement some of the right standards, if you will, that we might suggest, and also to help us to understand what functions we should be looking at that exist already based on the survey results. So in other words, if there's a standard that's not particularly meeting the goals of our community, then we should be monitoring that.
I see what you're saying, and yes, point well taken.
Okay.
Miriam, welcome. Glad you are here, even though we can't see you yet.
Okay.
Regarding the monitor, let me, before we go into the deeper into the conversation about the survey, let me give a very brief, and I mean brief, update about the whole process of monitoring or the progress of the police reform task force implementation. When last we talked about this back in March, the plan was that the city manager and the police chief would sit down together and begin to review every single one of those recommendations and figure out in what order they could be approached or they could be tackled, which ones are already actually being done. For example, one recommendation was to put the to edit the police manual and put it online. That's already working. Been going on for quite some time, actually. They got started on that while the task force was still working. And to look at all of the recommendations and figure out, okay, can these be done now? Do they need to be done in 6 months? Which ones have budget implications? Which ones are budget neutral, et cetera? So that was the plan once the task force report was submitted to Albany on April 1st. As we all know, city manager had a very, very serious car accident on April 14th. Thanks be to God that he is well and back at work at least part-time. Seems to quite miraculously have come through this, and we're grateful for that. So grateful. But I think although he hasn't said it, I think we can probably guess that sitting down with the chief and beginning this process hasn't really gotten any traction yet. I'm sure that he'll be able to come to another, maybe our next meeting of the HRC and update us. Either he or Chief Halmy might be willing to do so. So that's where I believe we are on our task of monitoring the implementation of the recommendation.
So
any questions on that?
Will we be tracking these meetings? Will we know when the meetings occur?
They will report to us on a periodic basis. That the plan is that they will either one or both of them will come to our meetings,
Thank you. Okay.
whether it's monthly or whether it's every other month.
Okay.
I don't know that yet, but
Yep.
they will be reporting to us
Okay.
on their progress.
Good.
Any other questions before we jump into the survey discussion? Nicola or Yao or Miriam?
Well, I was a bit curious, what time frame were you looking at to have this ready?
The survey?
Yes.
Not yet determined. Definitely
Okay.
not yet determined. This is our first conversation about this as an HRC. So we are literally at the very first step. And once we have our first discussions and start talking about some of the possible categories and questions, then I think that we need to reach out to those various groups, community groups, and say, here's what we're thinking of doing. Will you please chime in? Will you please collaborate with us and say, we think this kind of question should be asked, or you need to frame this differently, or what about, how are you planning to reach such and such a group? And I think without that collaboration across so many organizations in Peekskill, that the survey doesn't have a chance of gathering any meaningful information. And I'm really keen on gathering meaningful information that will inform how the police and community relations move forward. So.
Susie, I just thought about this, but are any of the religious organizations in the city going to be involved in any way?
They should be. We, at the very beginning of the police reform task force process back last summer, we reached out to the Peekskill Area Pastors Association, explaining what the task force was about and asking them to suggest people to be nominated to the task force. Unfortunately, we didn't get any response. I'm unwilling to give up on that. So when we start moving past step one on this survey development, we should reach out again and say, okay, here's where we are now, and we really, really, really want your input.
Just as a piece of information, when we were doing the DRI investigation in committee, the Spanish community was able to contribute greatly, much more greatly, when the faction at the Assumption Church became involved. So there's a very big population representation there that I think we could or possibly could make use of.
I think that's very important.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I think that, so there is a person from the task force, from Police Reform Task Force, who has submitted a letter of interest to the City Council to join our Human Relations Commission. I don't know where that stands right now, so I don't want to name any names. But that person is also quite involved at Church of the Assumption, and so could be very helpful in connecting us there. So that reminds me that I need to follow up with the city clerk and find out where that person's application, or whether it's been taken up by the committee of the whole yet, because the process is letter of intent goes to the committee of the whole. Committee of the whole recommends that the person's nomination go forward to council. Council considers it and appoints or doesn't appoint.
There's a magic person in this city, and I won't give you his name right now, but I think he could be a very big part of what we're trying to do, especially with the community, the Spanish community. So.
Okay, you can perhaps put that into an email to me.
Fine. Fine.
So, and Miriam, I'm hoping you can hear us, because I can't see you and you're on mute. But I hope that you'll be able to make significant connections with the Latinx community when we are beginning to develop actual questions for the survey and inviting everyone to participate in the development of it. So.
Hi everyone. Sorry, I didn't realize my microphone was muted.
Okay.
Yes, I'm definitely looking forward to helping, like, reach out to the Latino community in the Assumption Church. So yeah, count me in.
Excellent. Thank you. And I'm glad you're here tonight. Okay, why don't I, to get us started, bring up a couple, first of all, let's look at the city of Poughkeepsie's survey that they did in 2018. It's not terribly long, and one of the things that I think we'll need to keep in mind as we begin to develop this survey with the collaboration of our colleagues in community groups is that brevity is all. I think as much as the sociologist in me wants to dig deep on about 35 different topics that affect our community, brevity is important. And Poughkeepsie managed to do that. They worked with the Marist College Center for Social Justice and, oh gosh, I can't remember the official title, and I apologize for that. I reached out to the head of that center at Marist College during the Police Reform Task Force work to find out what their involvement was. And it turns out that the city of Poughkeepsie did all of the development work themselves. The only thing that the Marist College team did was help them analyze the data, basically crunch the numbers and give them output. So I was excited actually to learn that the city's questionnaire was truly homegrown, not developed by outside consultants. So let me do a screen share. Here we go. Is that the? Here we go. All right, can you all see that?
Yep.
Or do you need me to increase the size a little bit?
Increase the size, please.
Okay. Yeah, I don't have my reading glasses on, and if I can't see it, it's not big enough.
Mm-hmm.
Is that better?
Yes.
Or one more notch?
That might cut off some of the text if you go one more.
It might. So, as you can see, they have a very brief introduction about asking a series of questions, answers kept strictly confidential, individual responses not shared outside of the research team. They ask about length of residence, what kinds of issues that people feel are problems in their neighborhoods, and then they have a Likert scale of not a problem to big problem, 1 to 5. Let me know when I can go to the next page. I don't want to scroll too quickly.
You're good.
Okay. And then they move on from observation to actual victimhood. And then rating the safety of your neighborhood. And then safety of the city as a whole. And then they ask, I thought this was a very telling question, avoidance techniques in order to remain safe. Are people feeling as though they can't go out of their houses at night, or they're avoiding certain buildings, or do they feel as though they have to carry a weapon? They also make a distinction between property crime and violent crime so that the two didn't get lumped together, although the questions are that the behaviors are the same. Would you be likely to call the police, identify the person, give evidence in court? I will also, before the end of this meeting, I will put this file, it's a PDF. I will put it into chat so that you can download, and I'll also send it out as an email to everyone on the commission, because Marlene's not here tonight, and so I want her to be able to see it as well. Interesting about if you were the only witness to a crime, how likely would you be to call the police, identify, give evidence? Then they move on to responsiveness. How quickly do people think that the police would arrive if, in the case of a violent crime being committed? Question about whether or not the police department uses the community's input to develop solutions. And then asking them about agreement with questions about whether the police department holds officers accountable for wrong or inappropriate conduct. Is the department responsive to community concerns? Does the police department prioritize problems most important to the responders' community? And then there's a section about legitimacy of the City of Poughkeepsie's police department and the criminal justice system. This part's a little more complicated, and there's a lot of sort of skipping, so if you say no, you have not had contact with the City of Poughkeepsie Police for any reason in the last year, then you jump ahead to another question and skip several questions, like 10. Perceptions of whether you were treated fairly or listened to, or whether the process was well explained. Were you treated with respect? Right outcome according to your understanding of the law. Nicola, I'm going to be really interested to hear your comments on this survey. Satisfaction with outcome, satisfaction with officers' treatment. Then there's questions about perceived authority. Do you support how the police act in the community? Are they making fair and impartial decisions? 26 is critical because it's about profiling. trust, honesty, excessive force? Are the police part of your neighborhood? Quality of life overall? And then section 3 really is just demographics. The thing that I think we should probably add, and Jay Forbes mentions this in his suggestions, is that under gender, we should also include non-binary. Children, marital status, employment, school.
This is very personal.
Pardon me?
This is very personal.
It is, but it is entirely anonymous and confidential. So they never ask what neighborhood you live in. They never ask what street you live on.
Well, that should be in very big print. What
Yes,
you just
it
said.
should. Yeah, it's really only at the top of the first page.
Yeah.
It probably should be on every single page, or for the online version, because we will surely do an online version as well as a printed version. It should be on every screen as a header or a footer. And then they have additional pages for additional contacts, so that if you had more than one contact with the police in the last year, you have the opportunity to report on that and your perceptions of that experience. I think they go as far as only 3 contacts. So, so that is Poughkeepsie's version, which I think has a good structure, and we may be able to build on that. Sorry, I hope you can't hear my dog howling in the background.
I think it's a good way to start the program. It has.
To start
lots
the
of-
discussion, yeah.
Yes.
It does. One of the things that I was disappointed to hear was just how low their return rate was. I think they actually did a second, they only did it by mail. They actually did a second round of mailings because I think they got, I want to say, fewer than 500 responses. And that, to my mind, is not a significant response given the population. And they did a random sample.
What is their population?
I don't, it's larger than Peekskill.
Yeah, it's okay.
And I think that they did a random sample that was a significant, like, I need to go back and look at some of the information that I got from them, but it was a very small response rate. And so in 2018, I would have hoped that they would have had some sort of online vehicle to do this, even recognizing the digital divide, which is significant in communities.
I'm sorry, somebody's talking. This is Yao.
Yeah.
The thing that I see that what could be done, we could do the mailing, which is probably, you're going to do that, but also to have some type of stations, basically, reaching out, or reach out centers that's going to, target certain areas of the city, so everybody will feel more involved or get involved. Because sometimes when people get a mailing, they end up chucking it. They don't even look at it. They just say, it says residents of, of so-and-so address. And that it'll end up in file 13. So you have to, you might have to set up little stations and stuff like that, or leave a little campaign promoting the survey.
I'm sorry.
Maybe we could use pop-ups like vaccines.
Exactly. And, and speaking on the survey itself, it did have a section there where it asked you about your salary. And I looked at that as being like, well, they're asking you about your salary. They're also asking you about your income, your social economical your class
Yeah.
situation. And that automatically says, well, if you're making X amount of dollars, you might be white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. I'm just saying, or if you're making this amount, you're probably in this group, or in this amount, you're probably in that group. So that's kind of like targets people without even targeting them. You know what I mean? It's just that's just me. That's my New York mind. I mean, I think like that. I'm sorry. So when I see
No apologies.
$90,000, I said, okay, I know what this cat does. I know where I just know. Maybe that's an assumption. Maybe that's a bad assumption, but it's targeting groups. It's targeting groups without them even. We think it's not, but it is. But little pop-ups, like Joe said, it would be an excellent thing to get people involved and get the NAACP, get Hispanic Association, get everybody involved, and see where it goes.
Yeah.
I'd just like to follow through a little bit on that theme of the police department is already involved in doing a lot of things in the city. For instance, they come to every public housing meeting that the Public Housing Commission has monthly meetings, and the police chief comes. So they are involved in activities throughout the community right now. I think it's important that we understand the extent of those involvements. I think that will say a lot about them and give us the kind of foundation that they provide in the city. A little more realistically, we'll know where they are.
I agree, and that came up many times in the police reform task force's process, especially in the community engagement subgroup, which is one that I was part of. Asking what are they already doing, and the list of things that the police officers are already involved with in terms of community engagement is impressive.
Yes.
That doesn't mean that there aren't more opportunities or areas where they're not perceived as being involved, but we were all kind of surprised. We didn't know they were doing all that.
Yep. Good.
I also thought it was helpful to your point about the household income. I thought it was interesting how they phrased it, and I think that this question may have come from the Urban Institute, because there's a asterisk down here about a portion of the survey's use with permission of the Urban Institute. They talked about total combined household income from legal sources from all members of your household who are part of your family. So if you have a large extended family living with you, then your salary, your combined household income could be on the upper level of this scale, but it also could fall off the other end.
Okay,
Yeah.
I just say other concern that
Miriam?
yeah, hello, I'm sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So my only concern about the survey the sample that I'm looking at is that it's a bit too long. I know you said some of these, like, it depends on whether you answer yes or no, and you might skip like 10 questions. It just seems so long. And yes, every question that I see is important, and I think in order to gather the data, but my concern is like, okay, so if we mail this out, it could come like it can end up in the trash can. Number two, I don't. You mentioned about Poughkeepsie, they had a low turnout, I guess, with these
A low response rate, yes.
Yes, a low response. So is there like another version? Did they do anything else, or was this the only survey sample that they had used in order to get?
They sent it out again when they did their first random sample, and again, I cannot remember how many were in the first round of random sample. When they didn't get a sufficient response from that, they sent it out again to another random sample, and between the two, they got a few hundred. As I said, they did this in English and in Spanish. I do have the Spanish version as well, but they did not do this online. And
will we be able to have like will we be able to do this online?
yes,
Is the city
I've been
okay?
talking
Instead of
with
Peekskill?
I've been talking with the city manager's office about that, and
Okay.
the idea is
Right.
that we would have a mailing, and we will also have some available at City Hall and a drop-off point at City Hall for paper copies, but also working with the communications consultants that have recently been contracted with by the city to work with them on an online version as and getting that out. And again, working with our community organizations, once there is an online version, asking them to push it out to their email list. I mean, I think of the NAACP's amazing reach with their email list.
Right. Well, that's a wonderful way to do this as online, and even with the mailing, you could say, if you prefer, you can go to.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Just and have a link in the mailing. And I like your idea of pop-ups, Joe. I mean, having people with clipboards at the farmers market saying, "Would you be willing to participate in this survey?" Or
Yeah.
or at any of the at the health center. Or I understand that the garden, the community garden, Joe, that you were very excited about last year,
Yes.
over in Lepore Park, that's doing very well and is doing already doing distribution of free vegetables and herbs.
Yep.
On Saturday, I heard from someone who lives right up the street who said, "Get over here." So that could be another place where we could engage the community.
Yeah.
So
I
I
was-
feel as though, Miriam,
Oh,
go
I'm-
ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off. I was going
No.
to suggest the library. I don't know if the library would be interested in participating and helping us distribute like these survey questions.
I'm sure they would. I don't think that would be a problem. And we
Miriam,
can talk with Jennifer Brown about that.
I'm sorry. I was going to say my wife is on the board, so I have.
That's right, she is.
Perfect.
I could help out if you need. She could help out if we need. Yeah.
Perfect.
You're an
Okay.
influencer, Joe. You're an influencer.
Susie,
So,
I
yes.
have a few thoughts. Part of it is related to what you had brought to our attention, and I'd like to see the results of this survey. You know, what percentages said what and that kind of thing. That would help
We can
me
get that.
Yeah, that would, I think, help all of us to get a grasp on what information is really brought back. And by the way, Poughkeepsie's 30,000 people, so this was about 1%. And again, that doesn't, as you said, it's a random sample, and if it's done in some kind of, systematic way, it can be a low percentage as long as it's representative. I guess my overall thought about the survey is that this is very, very important. It's vital, but that there are other ways to gauge public opinion and get public feedback. Through social media, looking at social media, what people are calling crowdsourcing these days is sometimes very helpful. And then, things such as like in the high school, an essay writing contest, for example, or even a contest. I mean, the young people are doing it anyway. They're creating rap songs, they're creating poems related to police conduct. So it would be great for us to hear those as a way of gauging opinion. And I think my suggestion, I don't know if what you all think about this, is as we go forward with this, maybe we should come up with a kind of goal for ourselves. What, sorry for the background noise. Uh, what is the goal for our committee in conducting this survey? And, of course, we could say it's to improve relations between the police and the community. That's a possible goal. I guess the other two things I wanted to just throw out there, literacy issues. If someone is illiterate, which that does exist, and
Yep.
folks who are mentally disabled,
Good point.
who oftentimes have encounters with the police,
Yeah.
how would they respond, and can we
Yeah.
provide a mechanism? And then are there any, I didn't see in here any restriction on age, so I would assume anyone over 15 or anyone over 13 should be encouraged to respond. I don't know.
Yeah, I did not see anything either that just asked what year you were born.
Good point.
Let me zoom to the top really fast. Sorry, it's going to make you car sick. No, there's nothing in the introduction about age. You mentioned anyone over the age of 15, Nicola. Can you enlighten me as to why that would be an important cutoff?
There's no real set. We would have to decide on that. I mean, we can't expect, a 7 or 8 year old to be filling this out. They probably have opinions, as we saw with George Floyd's daughter. They have opinions about police conduct, and they have fears and things like that, which are very important, and aspirations, which are important to understand. But in terms of this survey, I guess I'm thinking if some student who's even 13 gets it, can they feel, that I could fill this out? Or maybe it's an irrelevant point. I don't know.
I don't know that it is irrelevant. I don't think so. And if we work with the school district to ask them to help promulgate it in classes or in the school buildings, that could help younger students, junior high, for example, or middle school rather, help them feel as though we want to hear their voice and that it's a safe thing to do.
I was also going to throw in another thought. I don't know if we have discussed about this in the past. Should we have volunteers? Maybe, I guess because of the pandemic, we need people like 18 and older to help. Maybe someone didn't receive are not able to completely read, in Spanish or in English because of a disability or because of a education, lack of education in terms of literacy. Maybe we can gather volunteers that can help them fill out for them. They ask the question and they circle in or write whatever it is, the person's response, in order to get more responses from more people that we probably weren't going to receive a response if they were to answer this on their own.
I think that's an excellent idea. And surely, as we work with our colleagues in the various community groups, we could ask for that help and say, can you recruit some volunteers from the NAACP or from CHOP or from whatever, and to do the CHOP board or the Hispanic Coalition or the local churches, asking people if they would be willing to volunteer to aid in completion. It's starting to sound a little bit like the census, but
I know. I was actually thinking about that too. I'm like, I think it's going to become like a census. But another question, who's going to be recording all of the data, like the responses that we're receiving, and who will be responsible for interpreting the information that we receive?
We haven't gotten that far yet. This is literally the first conversation we're having about it.
Okay.
As I said with Poughkeepsie,
Mm-hmm.
they contracted with the Center for
Yep.
Social Justice and at Marist.
Mhm. You're right.
I'm sure that wasn't a pro bono data analysis on the part of the Marist team, but I think that if we are able to generate enough excitement and interest in this survey and get a really good response rate, then the need for perhaps some professional consultation would be funded, or they'd see the need for funding it. And I realize that we are in an incredibly tight budget year statewide, but I don't want to volunteer Andy's budget without him here, but I would certainly think that we could approach council and say, we have this terrific data set and we need help. Joe, go ahead.
Yeah, this is just something that came into my head at the moment. I should know this, but I don't, and I'm sure it's published somewhere. But I think statistically, it's important to understand the type of crimes we have, the numbers of crimes we have, and I think it's really important to understand that in relationship to other communities of our size, and maybe even a little bit larger because we're growing. So I don't know how important that is in terms of our charter, but I think it's something that at least I would like to know. You know, where are we, and have the police compared themselves, or is there some way to get a comparison if we think that's important? I'm just throwing that out.
It's a very interesting question. I'm scrolling back up into the section about how often have you been aware of or seen the following crimes that occur in your neighborhood? And this is crucial right here. And there's, as I said before, there's a difference between observation and actually been a victim of. They specifically separated that out. So,
related to that, I'm not sure if there's a point at the end or somewhere in there that just allows the person being surveyed to elaborate. You know,
there is not a free comment.
Free comment,
at
yeah.
the very end. Yeah. And there are two schools of thought on that. On the one hand, if you put a free comment field at the very end of the survey, you could get some really amazing stuff. On the other hand, you could also get some trolling or some unhelpful information. Just so that's something that we should consider.
I guess the reason it came to mind is there were maybe 7 or 8 different types of crimes listed, and someone else may have something else in mind that is that they've seen or that they'd like to see addressed.
Okay, so perhaps having an other box down here and then a please specify rather than a free public comment thing at the end. I see what you mean. Yeah. So let me flip to the information that Jay Forbes sent, which does not go into the level of depth that the city of Poughkeepsie does. Let me see. Where is it? For some reason, I am not. I set that up on preview. Oh, there it is. Okay, sorry. I'm going to definitely need to increase that, or you are not going to be able to see it. So these are some of the categories that Jay suggested for demographics, race, and again, Poughkeepsie goes into more categories, age group, and then really only three main questions, which I think, as I said, brevity is important, but I feel as though if we kept it too short, we would be missing an incredibly important opportunity to gather a lot of important information.
The term de-escalation is pretty important these days, becoming more important. So I think that terminology should be used.
Yeah, that is good. And the screenshot got cut off, but over here it's and or save lives. That's what's missing there.
Yeah, yeah.
So, and as I said too, when we talked about the Poughkeepsie survey during the task force process, one size doesn't fit all. Even though the Poughkeepsie structure creates a good scaffold to build on, we would need to make some important choices about what applies here in Peekskill.
Right.
So, okay. Well, I'm mindful that we're coming up on the hour, and I want to have us end on time. In addition to this survey, which could keep us busy for a while, actually, I'd like to ask you for the next meeting to think about other projects in the community that have occurred to you that the HRC could be involved in, because part of our charter is education. And one of the things that occurred to me over the course of the last election cycle, nationally and locally, is that we as a society seem to have lost the ability to talk to each other across differences civilly. And that applies whether we're talking about anti-racism, sexism, homophobia, class warfare, class differences. And I wonder if there might be something that we can do as a Human Relations Commission to create an opportunity for people to come together to talk about or to learn about ways to have conversations across differences. How's that for pie in the sky?
At least 12 pieces in the pie.
I think it's very important, you know, how to communicate as much as what we say, you know, is very critical, and especially young people learning it is very important. It's a form of conflict resolution, and it also helps them, you know, as they get older. But certainly we adults can use some skills, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it doesn't take too deep of a wade into social media, whether it's here in Peekskill or nationally, to realize that people get behind a screen and with their fingers on the keyboard, and suddenly they're saying things that I don't think their mamas would be real proud of. So let's think about that as another topical conversation for next time. Our next meeting, the next fourth Tuesday, is Tuesday, June 22nd, right after the solstice. Ooh, which reminds me, does anyone know about anything happening with Juneteenth here in the city, given COVID?
No, I don't.
There's an event.
There's an event. That's all I know.
Okay.
Well,
Online or hybrid?
I you know what? It might the best person to probably talk to is LaFern Joseph. She
Okay.
may know. She runs the Fern Tree, so
Right.
if anything, she would know.
If anyone knows, she will know. Okay, that's a
Yes.
very good suggestion. Thank you. All right,
Susie, I'll forward you the flyer that I saw.
please do. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Anything else for the good of the order?
No, the order
No.
stands. The order stands.
All right.
And thank you for
Yeah, thanks for getting us to Peekskill Forum.
yes, good meeting.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Bye, y'all.
Great seeing
Take
y'all.
care.
Bye.
Have a great day.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Good night now.